All right. Hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. I hope you all had a good session in the breakout room. So once again, welcome to the Bodies Online Magdalena Online Festival, our very first Magdalena Online Festival. Earlier today, we had the opening and we had Tava Tibal singing for us, and that started and opened the festival. My name is Elizabeth de Roza, and I'm one of the organizing team of this festival. And it gives me great privilege today to actually introduce the start of our panel. So over the next 3 days, there will be 3 panels. And the 3 panels bring together a diverse group of women, a group of women theatre and performance practitioners and researchers to share how their artistic practices have shifted due to the pandemic, and to discuss the questions of embodiment and liveness with and in an online space that this shift has all affected us. Also, this panel will be in English, but if you do need translation, please go into the translation room where Eugenia Cano will be translating the panel for us. So today's panel, the theme is Bodies on Life. The panel asks these questions. What is liveness and life? What happens to theatre when bodies are distant? When here is also there. It asks how our many senses are engaged through these online spaces. This panel opens up a discussion and insights on how practitioners engage liveness in their practice. We have 3 speakers today. I'm very happy to introduce all 3 of them. Let me first introduce to you our first panelist. We all know her, and she is Jill Greenhalgh. Jill Greenhalgh has been a professional theatre maker since 1978. Her career as a performer, director, and producer has primarily focused on experimental physical practice. The specific interest in the performance work was developed by women that resulted in this foundation in 1986, the Magdalena Project, international network of women in contemporary theatre, which has grown into a worldwide organization with ongoing activities in 25 countries. Jill remains the founding artistic director of this project. Jill has also toured her own performances and led workshops extensively within Europe, Australasia, and the Americas throughout these years. Our second speaker or panelist is Rakini Devi. Rakhini is an Indian-born, Kolkata and Sydney-based multidisciplinary performance artist. Dr. Rakini Devi work centers on female religious iconography as protests against global misogynist atrocities, including female infanticide and global femicide. Trained in 2 forms of Indian classical dance, Bharatanatyam and Odissi, slow. Dr. Devi, Kalika Dance Company, 1991 to 1998, integrated classical Indian dance form into a contemporary context. Her doctoral exegesis, Urban Kali, from sacred dance to secular performance, incorporated her 3 decades of performance and practice-led research. Our third panelist is known as Maria X. Maria X is a professor in theatre, performance, and technology, and she is the Associate Dean of Research and Enterprise at Kingston School of Art, London. Maria has worked as a curator, producer, performer, and community organizer in the United Kingdom and internationally. She has published and lectured widely and is the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Performance Arts and Digital Media. Welcome to my three panelists who will open today's panel. And so without any delay, I will hand over to Jill. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And particularly thank you to Parvati for the opening songs. It was wonderfully grounding, and I thank her from the bottom of my heart. This statement that Elizabeth gave us a while back, this embodiment has had its day, I couldn't agree less. And if anything, I think this last year of Zoom mania and Zoom communication has proved that. A lot of levels, including my own, of anxiety have risen. It's almost epidemic, the doctors tell me, that a third of their patients are suffering from anxiety. And I believe that's because we are not in embodied connection, in embodied proximity to those who we love and who inspire us. So I couldn't disagree more with this. Embodiment has had its day. I want to thank the organisers as well of this festival. I think they've achieved something extraordinary. It's a very difficult time to make work and to inspire us all to come along. I'm also glad that I'm one of the first speakers because I'm quite a Luddite. I'm a techno-twit. I do not like the online forum, but I have risen to the challenge of attempting to bring one of my performances onto the online forum. I'm glad I'm going first because I'm hoping that everything that comes after will prove me wrong, that there are wonderful examples. And again, I have to come back to Parvati because somehow she completely transcended the technology with her voice just now. And that was marvelous. But this transcending of the technology is the thing that worries me most, because I feel very controlled by it on many levels. And that's sort of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to speak to the theme of this panel through the lens, and there I am already using camera language through the lens of Daughter, which is a performance that I have done 22 times, I think, in 15 different countries with over 200 women. Normally what I do is I work within a festival. I will work for 20 hours with a group of women who have selected to do the Daughter performance. The Daughter performance is looking at the mother-daughter dyad. It's a very intimate performance. It's a one-on-one performance. So there are maybe 12 performers usually, each with their own table and two chairs. And they will engage with just one person. Each of the tables will be engaging with one person, telling stories, speaking to them about their mother or their daughter through the use of objects and storytelling. The reason I do this work is because the reason every time I'm invited to a festival, I've resisted for the last many years, in fact, in just doing a workshop. I don't want to do workshops anymore. I want to make work, and I want to make work to scale. And you can't do that. It's just impossible to tour 12 women in these days if you're doing anything in the least bit experimental and non-commercial, which my work isn't. So my strategy has been to create strategies to be able to make a piece of work in 20 hours. And the latest of those experiments is Daughter. And as I said, I've done it 22 times, I think, across in 15 different countries. And it's been very successful, I think. Its intimacy is very successful. It touches. But the performance completely works on proximity and on intimacy and on eye contact. The direct communication between the storyteller and the listener. And the eye contact. And the first thing I discovered when we started making this online version of Daughter was that you can't have eye contact on Zoom unless you stare at a green dot, but you're not having eye contact because you're just staring at a camera. So that's the first hurdle, really, the most principal hurdle, that my performers cannot look their listeners, the person at their table, in the eye. Helen suggested that Helen challenged me, as she does on many things, to try to do Daughter online. And I agreed, but with the caveat that I would pull out if it didn't work at any point. What we did was we worked 3 hours a week. The group that I work with, we were going to do Daughter in Nottingham March before last, and then of course COVID happened and we couldn't do it. It's the first time I've done it with a British group of performers, so I was very excited, but then we couldn't do it, so we put it off for a year. But then this opportunity came and I approached the same group and they really wanted to try to do it, and they have pushed me through to what the performance will be on Sunday, because many times I've wanted to pull out, from the moment we couldn't make eye contact to many other obstacles that came along that just seemed to jeopardize and compromise the work of what I know Daughter can be. So we worked every 3 hours a week from February. I went through the process as best I could that I normally go through, and then the tech took up much of the frustrating kind of time. The tech was the strongest obstacle. I'd also want to say, on the other side of that, the joy. I live rurally, and I've been very isolated, just me and my dog, in a rural situation for the whole of lockdown. So for a year, I've seen very few people. So the joy of Zoom, having tea on Zoom and meeting people on Zoom, has been a lifesaver. I have to say that. And also the joy of doing some work, rehearsing once a week, was also a lifesaver, actually getting on with some work. But having said that, the frustrations are the things that I want to talk about, and I'm sure these will be unpicked by people throughout the festival. Apart from the eye contact, the other thing that really disturbs me is the frame. The frame is so rigid when we're working online. It is a rigid rectangle. When we're performing live, or when we have a live audience, those audience members can zoom into detail. They can look away. They can take in a whole space, rather than just this frame that we are presenting. So this first thing is the rigidity of this frame that I really want to question, and want to try to understand how we can master it or go through it, so for it not to be such a rigid limitation? And I have no idea how to answer this. The other obstacle, or the other issue that really affects me, is to do with that of commitment. And that's from the audience. So when we're doing things online, we can very easily make ourselves go dark and just have our name there and go off and get a cup of tea, and or go to the toilet, or go and do something else, or answer our emails, or whatever. The commitment to the performance, to being inside the performance, is so much less. So there's no travel. You don't have to make a journey to see this performance. You don't have to invest financially to see this performance. You don't really have to invest much time, because if you're a bit bored, then you just switch off and go do something, and nobody will see you shuffling out of the theatre, as it were. So this commitment, this investment, audience investment, is another level that I would like to look at and like to challenge, and see how other people are resolving that. Again, on the flip side, the presence that is necessary to keep somebody with you online requires a great deal more than if they are live with you. The presence to block out anything else and just be in the performance, lights down, as it were. Parvati just did that quite wonderfully, and I really hope that I see that more this week. I'm sure I will. The third thing that I wanted to just touch on is the issue of loneliness. I think the online platform is deeply, deeply lonely. And I say that because it's a nice chat forum, the internet and Zoom. It's been a great place to have chats. But every time the chat is over, or the performance is over, or the rehearsal is over, suddenly you press the leave button, and you're in exactly the same place you were an hour ago, half an hour ago, alone, in my case, alone in my kitchen, in my sitting room. And that loneliness, I feel, has been really profound for a lot of people and a lot of practitioners. Well, I don't know, but that's what I'm imagining. And it's quite insidious. It creeps in, loneliness and that feeling. And theatre, live theatre, is the opposite of that, because you're in community, experiencing something together. We think we're in community, in this forum, we're in community, experiencing something together, but I'm absolutely alone. And I've been thinking a great deal about that. How much time have I got, Elizabeth? Do you know?
You have another, just give me a second. You have another 3 minutes more to go. Well, actually 8 minutes, yeah.
Okay, thanks, that's great. So I've talked about the loneliness, I've talked about the commitment, I've talked about the eye contact, and I've talked about, what was the other thing I talked about? Frame. I love film. I love watching films. And I think the genre of film has really developed marvelously, and is an extremely beautiful art form. And I get very excited seeing certain films. And sometimes recently, before lockdown and all that happened, the National Theatre here in Britain started live streaming performances from London, say, from the National Theatre. And that was wonderful in a way for me, who lives very rurally, 7 hours drive from London, to be able to see a live stream. But from the very beginning, even though it was exciting to suddenly see great plays or great operas. I found it intensely frustrating because my view of what I was watching was completely controlled by some young editor in London. They could choose what I was looking at. So watching an opera, for example, they would constantly focus in on a face or, you know, somebody who was singing. And I wanted to see the whole thing as I would in a theatre. So this was one frustration. The other frustration was that it was a live event, and I tried to get over my prejudice of these events. It was a live event, but then they started doing this thing called the encore, which was basically just showing the live event, but 3 weeks later. So it wasn't live anymore, but it was absolutely no different from the live event. It was the same thing. So that became, I liked, in a way, something where I felt so cheated, because the liveness of being with performers on stage is what theatre is. It's not film, it is live. And in fact, what it was turning my beloved theatre into was film. And very often not terribly good film, really. Not in terms of the kinds of films that we do get to experience.
We have 5 minutes left, Jill.
Okay, won't use it all, I promise. So I just wanted to throw those negative things out. We are in Daughter. We are going to attempt to do this on Sunday. I absolutely love the commitment and honor the commitment of the people who've worked with me, because it's been very frustrating. I'm particularly thanking Christina, who has helped us with the platforms that we're going to be using. And I hope it functions. But it's been a huge challenge trying to replicate or trying to create this liveness, this intimacy, this proximity, and on a frame that is a rectangle and small in my sitting room. And I just cannot wait to be in the room with performers again and rehearsing, and with audience. And I think going back into that space, I will never take it for granted again after this year of painful distance. Yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you very much. And so now we move on to Rakhini. Thank you, Rakhini.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jill. That was just, really loneliness is a huge issue with what's happened to all of us. I'm going to just charge through my paper in case I don't get through it. So I'm just going to start now. So my contribution to the panel includes different perspectives of the elements associated with liveness and performance, such as intimacy and embodiment, and the limitations of online performing bodies across the arts that, due to its very nature, creates a sense of absence or erasure. I will also be drawing on my recent multidisciplinary exhibition, which is titled Inhabiting Erasures, Embodying Traces of the Feminine, which was in March of this year, that focused on the erasure of women from global misogynist atrocities. The work was developed during lockdown and self-isolation. My only contact with the world outside was via social media and Zoom. The exhibition aimed to expand my concept of embodiment and invisibility, or erasure. I expressed these through my journal art, large-scale canvas paintings and installations using canopies, costumes, and objects that created a sense of the absent body. For the opening and closing performances with live music, I inhabited one of the empty canopies. I also drew on another conference that happened right in the middle of our lockdown last year in July 2020, when I participated in another online conference titled Dance Lab, which is produced by Dance Nucleus, co-curated by Daniel Kok and Sean Chua from Singapore. The lab, which was facilitated by Critical Path in Sydney, hosted 60 participants from 6 regional clusters across Australia, Hong Kong, India, Singapore, Philippines, and Taiwan, and interrogated the invisibility/impact of live bodies versus an online performance arena. Discussions centered on identifying the ways of nursing into being a new vital reality that addresses absences, exclusions, and erasures that have appeared in the collective body. The hostile environment of the ongoing pandemic has illuminated the precarious nature of the artist's plight, a condition already plagued by its own pre-pandemic chronic illnesses. The complex issues of sustaining a performing arts practice, aside from financial support, is dependent on physical and mental well-being in order to maintain a stressful level of what many feel that's happened in the past year, which is a relentless productive output that has weighed heavily on us. The interesting structure of Dance Lab was, from my own experience and contact with colleagues in India, Europe, and the US, I discovered that the pandemic-induced pressure to remain relevant, competitive, and strong has proved to be an added challenge for many, requiring an altogether new form of virtual stamina. The interesting structure of the Dance Lab conference was its method of analysis of the pandemic body by dividing the topic into 3 main areas for discussion.
Rakini, please slow down. Please slow down.
For the translation? Sorry.
Yes, for the translation, you need to slow down a bit.
Yeah, okay. The interesting structure of Dance Lab was its method of analysis of the pandemic body by dividing the topic into 3 main areas of discussion, mainly diagnosis that addressed the pandemic body and the metaphors for illness. The second was clinics that addressed the prognosis, and finally treatment and rehabilitation. These discussions were separated into small groups chosen by the facilitators. And then at the end of the day, we got together and discussed what we had come across. The collective diagnosis that emerged from these exchanges was that our already flawed and chronically ill system has been brought into sharp focus with the onset of the global pandemic. Key topics of debate included: how can we thrive within this new diseased environment? How does the COVID body move and survive? How do we dismantle the disparities of resources and hierarchical pressures that affect us disproportionately? How do we chart a course of action whilst gripped with fear, isolation, and a general sense of malady? After months of many of us being in lockdown and quarantined repeatedly, our collective enforced retreat gave us a sense of urgency and desperate need to share and exchange our responses. Time and time again, I was struck by the disparity of experiences of artists from different countries in contrast to my own privilege and in comparison to my colleagues in India and other parts of Asia. The pandemic was another disaster to add to political trauma in different parts of the world. For example, Hong Kong artists were suffering political unrest and months of curfews. India was still reeling from the terrible, shameful treatment of its migrant workers. These additional ruptures of peace and the consequences to the economy dictated or shaped as the general sense of what was happening. I realized that practicing my art was a privilege. Isolating alone was a privilege. The realization of these disparities led to my writing another paper titled Power, Privilege, and Performative Wokeness. I'm just skipping in case I am going to run out of time. Sorry, I'm having technical problems with these two laptops happening here. So I read a bit of Philip Oslander's 2008 work called Live and Technologically Mediated Performance, which suggests that the concept of liveness is a moving target whose definition changes over time in relation to technological development. I quote an excerpt from his work, Liveness, Performance in a Mediated Culture. It may be that we are now at a point at which liveness can no longer be defined purely in terms of either the presence of living human beings before each other or physical and temporal relationships between them. The emerging definition of liveness may be built primarily around the audience's affective experience. To the extent that websites and other virtual entities respond to us in real time, they feel live to us, and this may be the kind of liveness we now value. Close quote. The language of the body is not singular. It is a language of the past, the present, always immediate. The response or interaction of the audience and the sense of intimacy that is generated through these encounters measures the experiences of live performance. Anne Marsh, in her book Performance Ritual Document, offers a positive aspect of online performance. What happens when participatory performance practice embraces the internet and is used to address personal and political issues? Here we have a mediated performance that is inclusive and harnesses the potential of the internet to connect people across the globe. In some instances, these connections between people have highlighted the intimacy of reception that's built into the internet. Thus, on one hand, the internet can stress surveillance and distraction, and on the other, as it is beamed to individual personal computers in our homes, it can create the platform for intimate exchanges. As an artist researcher who has spent an entire career interrogating various possibilities and methods of embodiment, the pandemic has created both challenges and opportunities to forge new connections and learn new skills of communication. Exploring a pathway through this new reality presents opportunities not only to redefine the relationship between the individual's mind and body, but also to reach diverse cultures and communities on a global scale.
Rakini, please slow down. Please slow down.
While performance on screen is nothing new, it has always been an artistic choice, an additional mode of communication, experimentation, and freedom to expand, especially conceptual works, onto screens and enabling accessibility. This is a different experience to how liveness and performance is now defined due to travel restrictions, etc. The collective feeling is a sense of grief, a mourning for what has been lost, the fear of uncertainty, and most specifically affecting the livelihoods of artists. but by reflecting on the crucial aspects of liveness that we all took for granted, could we learn new ways of inhabiting these recurring absences and erasures? For example, I recently attended 2 evenings of a 3-day event presented by Performance Space at Carriageworks called Live Dreams, which took place in a physical theatre in Carriageworks and was streamed live. What I found was that a lot of the works, I found that many of the streaming in real-time performances had worked more seamlessly than others that combined or presented pre-recorded video. In some cases, I found the stream live performance even more engaging than the physically present live performances, something I would never have imagined in the past. I questioned my own shift in perception of viewing work and find that while the live body in performance will never be obsolete, the option to view it at home anywhere in the world is one that is becoming the norm. I did wonder, however, if we were now becoming so attuned to watching screen-based or mediated performance due to our saturation of extra screen time during lockdown, that it almost seems a comfortable, less engaged, lazy, less present attitude to watch this mix of live and online format of performances, even when we are present physically in a theatre. This show is one of many examples of how audiences are being encouraged to experience art, not only in different media, but to have a choice of witnessing without being physically present. Like many of my friends and colleagues being isolated or cancelled, I longed for live performance, human contact, and the sheer enjoyment of sharing with other bodies in a venue. I'm going to skip a few things because I'm afraid of running out of time. Conferences like this one, generating research, including case study, will continue to provide divergence and consolidation of the liveness debate that reveals more areas that needs to be addressed. For example, where does this leave performance that is driven by ritual? Ritual is often a sensory experience enhanced by the presence of other bodies, sound, aromas, and in my opinion, incapable of evoking the same experience viewed on a laptop or phone. The limitations of the online experience cannot compare to the liveness of performance due to the physical absence of an audience that is essentially a crucial element of the performance. For example, my cultural and traditional study and practice of Indian classical dance is embedded in the theory of rasa, which is the taste and essence of the performance that cannot be easily defined in Western terms, that can be applied theoretically to contemporary and universal terms. In speaking of rasa, I refer to the state of artistic emotion or savoring the essence or the juice of the performance. Rasa in this context of liveness is regarded as an essential component of any work of visual, literary, or performing art. It has been described as a contemplative abstraction in which the innermost emotions of both the rasa generated from performance and the rasika, the witness and participant of the performance, is equally suffused with the encompassing aura of embodied forms. The 10th century Kashmiri Shaivite philosopher Abhinava Gupta's famous philosophical commentary on the Natya Shastra, the Sanskrit treatise on the performing arts, is still relevant today. The long-standing aesthetic tradition from ancient India can be applied to all cultures and traditions of the performing arts. According to the rasa theory of the Natya Sastra, the entertainment is not the primary goal of the performing arts, but instead to transport the audience or the rasikas into a parallel realm infused with awe and bliss, where he experiences the essence of his own consciousness. In concluding, from my own personal perspective, I realize now more than ever that performance and art have become anchors in my life. And during the long solitude and isolation of 2020, that the quiet of non-live performance does not reflect a regression or stagnation in art or one's practice. I look forward to embracing both realities in our evolution as artists. Presenting bodies online or in the flesh is still performance and exchange, and a hybridity that has always existed in some form in the history of performing arts. The liveness versus online discussion gives us the potential to develop mediating live performance as a subject that will generate endless expression, definition, and research. Most crucial to this transformation is our process of creating a renewed awareness of the liveness of skin and breath and the vitality of the live presence that is at the core of our practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rakini. We'll move on to our third speaker, Maria X. I just want to remind Maria, please speak slowly because we've been, the translators are having difficulty keeping up with us. Thank you very much, Maria. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I will do my best to remember to speak slowly. I do tend to speak fast, so do remind me if I lose it.
Sure.
So thanks for inviting me, and thanks to the previous speakers. It's really interesting to hear you, and I think I share a lot of the reflections and concerns that have been expressed. So I will talk about digital intimacies in live performance encounters. And I will start with a love story, which I think is appropriate for this context. First, a disclaimer to say this isn't, I come from academia, this isn't an academic paper. It's very much a paper, kind of presentation. It's not a paper from the perspective of my experience as a participant and audience member in many performances that have taken place online and digital spaces over many years, and as a collaborator of those artists through curatorial practice primarily. And I am going back quite a long time. So this is Oria, an artist called Oria Harvey, and those are stills from her in a platform called hell.com. Oria is an American artist, American born, who is one of the most important, I think, in my view, net artists. Net art famously has died many times, as many net art commentators and critics have gleefully expressed in the past. But it is really interesting to revisit as a type of work that was born through and for the internet and the online space, and I think particularly relevant to our current state. So Oria Harvey met Michael Samin on hell.com in '99. And hell.com was a members only website where it was quite infamous at the time, and it was frequented by a number of net artists of the active around that time. And this little story that I'm sharing with you now, you can find on Rhizome's anthology of net art. This is the story of a love affair. As I said, Oria and Michael fell in love. Oria was based in New York and Michael was based in Gand in Belgium at the time, both net artists. And Oria had founded entropy.com, which was a net art outlet, also a kind of online digital design outlet, and which had already won a couple of Webby awards. So quite an important net artist already at that point.
Sorry, Maria, can I just ask you to slow down, please? Thank you.
Slow down, sorry.
Much.
Yes.
Actually, rather, as well as slowing down, maybe to leave a little pause.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So in 1999, Harvey and Samin shared their first collective collaborative project, which was called Skin on Skin on Skin. And it wasn't a live performance, it was a net art installation piece, which was available to view as pay-per-view on hell.com. And that is the first page of Skin on Skin on Skin. So immediate, you're hit by skin if in the frame of your computer screen and as a digital image. Skin on Skin on Skin was a series of love letters to each other. And the piece consisted of 15 love letters through which the artists narrated the story of their love affair, their remote love affair. And the question was, how does one and one become one through the wires, as it were. So really it's a very simple story of a remote love affair. So yes, I think this is just another slide from the Rhizome anthology, and you can just see some stills from the piece. So this leads me to a performance that has influenced me deeply, a piece called Wirefire, which was a durational performance that took place from 1999 to 2003, and which was Oria and Michael's second piece that they did together. So by that point, they were Entropy and Super. They were a collective and developed work together. Wirefire, and this can be found on Bitforms. I've got the link here on a net art archaeology piece where there are links to stills of the work. And just to say the work isn't available anymore online, which is very sad. So Wirefire was an online performance that occurred weekly, every Thursday night at midnight for 4 years. Oria describes the work as techno-romanticism. And so the intention was to use the internet as a site for human connectivity and to kind of counter the coldness, if you want, of the machine. The piece was handmade with Flash and JavaScript. And it was, for me, the experience was like watching a live VJ performance. So it wasn't a theatrical performance in the sense of traditional characters and a story with a beginning, middle, and end. It was very much a visual performance that was had characters where the Oria and Michael were the protagonists and had the backbone of a story, which was the story of their love affair. At the end of every performance, the artist would take a photograph to document every piece. And that was, for me, it was one of the first works that I encountered of this type. And indeed, it was the first online durational performance or recurring performance of this type. I will show you some stills of the work. As I said, it's not possible to access live kind of videos of the work anymore, recorded videos of the work. And so you can see they are very particular kind of a visual aesthetic. The work was very much a collage, so that's why I described as VJing. It brought together images that the artists were creating with some found material. It used visuals, sonic found material, and also text. The text wasn't narrating a story. It was mostly used as part of the visuals. You can see, I'll go back, in some slides, we'll find one in a minute, you can see the webcams. So originally there weren't webcams there, and then they were added. So the artists were, you could see them live in some floating webcams that would appear and disappear. There's one here. And here you can also see a text chat window. So on occasion, audiences could text into kind of chat with the performers in real time. This was occasional, it wasn't a permanent function. Sometimes the artists would respond and sometimes they wouldn't. And quite often the audience responses would gradually kind of direct the trajectory of the performance towards a particular area, or kind of the visual materials would respond to those comments on occasion. But it wasn't a linear type of interaction, so you couldn't bank on that. I still have some more slides just because I love their visuals so much, and I think they give you a sense of how visually lush the piece was. And the audiences, I wasn't able to find a slide where you could see that, but the audiences were also visible on the screen as specks of dust. So it was obviously a very abstract representation of the people watching the performance. But what this did was made you feel present and made you feel present with others. So being a speck of dust on that screen with other specks gave you a sense that you were there with others in a community sharing this live experience together. So I was one of the big fans of Wirefire, as you can tell. I was following the performance over the 4 years that it was live. And I think it's for me, it's one of the most iconic, I would say, works of online performance in terms of how intimate the piece was. And there was there were many reasons for that. The fact that it was taking place at midnight in itself meant that you were likely to be at home without any distractions of family or work. It was dark. You could make that experience very intimate if you wanted. The fact that it was a real love affair, and perhaps that did make the piece intense as an exchange, and that was palpable through the wires in a way that I haven't experienced many times elsewhere. There were characters that you could identify with. So Oria and Michael were the characters of the piece, and there was a story. There was the story of their love affair. But there wasn't a narrative in that you needed to follow, and there weren't language barriers because the story didn't rely on a particular language for it to be told. There was continuity and commitment. And so Jill mentioned the term commitment. I think it's really interesting to talk about that later. But it was very much an act of commitment going back to that performance. From the performers and from the audiences. And as I said before, there was very much a sense of community, of being there together, of being able to rely on each other for turning up every Thursday, or most Thursdays, a sense of going home into that performance, a sense of intimacy. The live encounter was exciting and there was an element of surprise. The fact that sometimes the performers would interact with you and sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes you could chat and sometimes you couldn't. Sometimes they were present in a little camera bobbing along the screen and sometimes they weren't. We're all making each live encounter really special and different and kind of surprising in a different way. And occasion, yes, no, I talked about the real-time interaction. So I think I've covered this slide. So this is Oria and Michael at their home in Gang, which I visited. So the end of the love affair is that they did get married in the end, and Oria moved to Belgium, and they have been working together ever since, developing really interesting work, such as KISS, one of the first 3D scanning performances. So they scanned their bodies in a KISS, and it's a very kind of technologically very imperfect piece, but really interesting, again, in how visceral it is as a digital artwork. Sorry, I'll go back. And then they developed Tale of Tales, which was an indie kind of a games development studio. So this is just an example of a performance that for me was interesting in how it managed to achieve a sense of intimacy through a remote digital encounter. And I have done a lot of kind of work on that area of performance and intimacy. This is a book that resulted from a festival I did with Rachel Zerihan at Goldsmiths a very long time ago, back in 2007. And some of you were there and contributed. And the still is from an artist called Jaime Del Val, who performed at the Intimacy Festival. The works that we presented, some were very much one-to-one encounters in real space, very visceral physical encounters, such as the one that Jill described. And some were digital. And we were very interested to look at the types of intimacy that were possible through the different media and how that translated, and how the audience engaged with those types of works. So in the case of Jaime, for example, his performance was in real space. It could easily have been a live screening, because what he did as a dancer with his dancer collaborator was to perform within a space with projection, 360 projections. And the projections were of physical landscapes of their bodies that were generated by micro cameras worn on their bodies, on and inside the bodies, different parts of the bodies. And sometimes you could tell which part of the body that was, and sometimes you couldn't. So the result was kind of bodily landscapes, I call them, really, again, beautiful, kind of evocative bodily landscapes that moved quite seamlessly from the physical to the digital space, creating
5 minutes more.
A visceral experience. Thank you. So we're coming to the day, and obviously we've been hit by coronavirus and we can't have intimate encounters of any kind. And many companies moved to that space of online work in different ways. We talked about a National Theatre Live that was happening before. And again, we can talk more about this later, because I do think that the way that liveness is understood in that context as not a real-time connection, but as the sense of a live experience is interesting. But NT moved its theatre to home, so it's National Theatre Home, over the period of the pandemic. Theatres that had never developed work for digital or online did during this time, such as the Almeida in London, and Bush Theatre did a series of what they called theatre films in response to Black Lives Matter. Belarus Free Theatre opened a school for fools online for the first time. I did an online premiere, and performers were mixed together from 15 different live locations. And my colleague Hannah Balu developed her performance art piece, Guga 2, a work, very visceral, a live performance work about the pregnant female body as a film. Some interesting performances that used the restrictions of COVID in an interesting manner were things like performances like Theatre in Quarantine, a live theatre laboratory that live streamed out of an East Village closet, measuring 8 square feet. So I don't know if any of you followed that. I think they have produced about 20 live performances during this time, all streamed live out of a cupboard. And that created really interesting restrictions in terms of the physical space and how the body is placed in that physical space that I think really added to the work. And then I would like to refer also to Lynn Lu's piece, Skinship, as part of a new season of Care, in which the artist invited participants to bathe together apart. So the invitation was to attend the performance from your bath while having a bath, and you could keep your camera on or off, or you could use filters and so on. But it was about having this shared corporeal experience through the online space. And things like Dream, a work by Royal Shakespeare Company and other companies, which was inspired by Shakespeare's Midnight Summer Dream, and was developed using motion capture into the epic Unreal Games Unreal Engine. So it was meant to be an immersive experience, but it was experienced online. So that's some of the stills of this work, and the participants, the audiences, were moving around those fireflies that you can see here in the images, and the fireflies were kind of guiding the action. I have various thoughts about this piece, and we can discuss this later. That's just another still. It didn't quite work for me. I don't think I have much time to go into this now, but I can say more about this later. So performance online, is it a compromise of the body in space? Do we compromise being together with others in real space? Do we compromise that sense of immersion we get in physical performance, the sense of liveness and of experience? Is it an opportunity for autonomy and dissent, being able to bypass the theatre space and to stream work from any kind of space, including one's cupboard? Is it an opportunity for a different kind of intimacy, such as the type of intimacy that Oria and Harvey developed through their practice, for reaching out to wider audiences, not the primarily white middle-class audiences that tend to go to the theatre space, and for experimenting with new hybrid forms of theatre that people here have been doing for a long time? It's both. I think it's both, and we can continue to have that conversation. I share some of Jill's concerns, but I also do think there's wonderful opportunities to be had for encounters that aren't possible in physical space and are possible in digital space. So it isn't about an either or, it is about a richness. And I appreciate that right now the option isn't there, but it will be with us again. So it's about, I think now is the time and the opportunity to experiment with what we have and to enrich our performance practices. And to do that, I would suggest what we need to do first, and what I think there is to learn from Oria and Michael's work is that we need to work with that absence and with the loss we've suffered through the pandemic and the loss of the physical body in the digital space. We need to work with what is not there rather than conceal this absence or try to replace it or pretend that it is there or try to duplicate and simulate the conditions of physical, visceral presence. We need to work with the constraints, the limitations, the imperfections that we have in the online space, the size of the cupboard, or the fact that we are bathing separately, but at the same time. We need to work with our vulnerabilities in the digital space. And we need to extend to each other, to audiences, and to through performance, an invitation to a shared experience, which for me, the Wirefire piece very much did, but so did Lynn Lu's piece of joint bathing. So there are many ways of achieving that, many of which don't actually require big budgets, such as the budgets that supported the work of Dream. That's all for me, and it'd be interesting to have a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jill, Rakini, and Maria. Maybe this will spotlight everyone. So we're going to open for Q&A. And so the way we're going to do it is we have, you can type your questions on the chat, and we have chat moderators who will present the questions to the three speakers, or you can speak through the video itself. So I guess I will start off. What I found very prominent in the three conversations was the idea of absence and the extension of absence and how we work with absence and the extension of extending absence so that we can create a shared experience. And I think for me, the idea of first starting this festival was actually the idea of, the absence of the Magdalena Festival and the absence of, meeting my collaborators and the absence, and therefore the idea of the festival came about. So I will stop here. I will not speak anymore, and I open the floor to the participants here. So over to you. Does anyone have any questions? And yeah. Marie, maybe the chat moderator, Helen, could I do notice that there are some questions in the chat? Yeah.
Well, there were not so many questions. There were a lot of really interesting comments, which I didn't catch all of because there was so many. But there was the comment in response to not having eye contact that Karenza made during Jill's talk. About having the camera off and on, and if the audiences also have their camera on, they can be present, and even if it's not eye contact, it is a connection and a reaction that can happen. Janaina commented about the light being very important. This was when Maria was talking about Wirefire being in the night and how the daylight can make it very distracting. Although I would answer to that most of the times when I watched Wirefire, which was an incredible piece, I was in New Zealand and it was daylight. It was the middle of the day. And okay, my bedroom at that time where I was not the brightest room, but I was completely engaged and there, not distracted at all. Here's a question here from Clara. Some artists are working with low-tech adaptations of medical and gaming gadgets to expand presence, physicality, consciousness in our relation with the computer and the virtual. Does Maria know some of these examples of artists working with adaptations of medical or gaming gadgets?
No, I don't know of any artists working with medical gadgets. So it would be very interesting to find out. There are many artists working with games, but perhaps it would be good to understand what I can't remember the name of the person who asked the question, Clara. What Clara means by gadgets? It would be interesting if she could give us examples. But it sounds very good.
Maybe Clara is writing about that, but there's a question from Leticia. I have thought this is a privileged place, as not everyone has access to good internet. Here in Brazil, many times people don't even go to the theatre. How to think about generation and democratization of the audience for online plays? I think it's a question for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Any one of the speakers would like to take that question first, and then we can. Yeah.
And then I'll go first, just to say that, that being the Luddite here, I just want to thank the other two for really opening up some doors for me and actually highlighting some work that was obviously from the comments, work that has had a profound effect on people. So many thanks for that. I have no idea. When you talk about the democratization of work, I'm not quite sure what you mean, Letitia. If you're talking about the work being accessible to younger audiences who are really using technology, or if you're talking about democratization of work for people who haven't got computers, so I'm not quite sure what you mean. So I'd just like you to clarify that. Maybe somebody else has got something to say. No.
Can I respond to say, I think a lot of the most interesting work that has developed in kind of online spaces is actually work that is low tech and doesn't require access to particularly fast internet connections or strong computers, etc. And a lot of the artists here, Helen, Suzanne, Christina, have been developing that type of practice for a long time. And so I know that, for example, Helen, Avatar Body Collision did work online, and I know that you wanted to use browsers so that the work could be accessible for people who didn't have kind of particularly fast connections and so on. And I have found those platforms and those practices very helpful in working with different types of communities in areas which aren't particularly wealthy or which don't have access to high-tech technologies. And those would include, places like schools in Greece, for example, where the education had to go online like everywhere else this year. The schools in Greece, like in many other parts of the world, are very underfunded and have very little access to technology. And so I have had some workshops with teachers to look at platforms that would facilitate online performance from people's phones or from whatever platforms they have, whatever access to technology they have and they can share. And I think that is, I think that the question of digital poverty is pertinent to some types of practices, but not to all.
Yeah, maybe I could just chip in and say something. It's Helen speaking. With Upstage, the platform that Avatar Body Collision developed, when we began with that, one of our members was on a dial-up internet connection in a rural area where she had things like lightning strikes and electric fence pulsing that often impacted on her connection. And from the very outset, we were conscious, not only for that reason, but also from the point of view of the audience, that we wanted to prioritize accessibility. Obviously, you have to have the internet. You've got to have some kind of internet connection, otherwise you cannot participate in online performance. But we have always found that being able to do something clever with very little is much more interesting than having a huge budget and all the technology in the world, because then you often come out with something that actually is, well, from what I've seen, often very lazy work, because people just think they can throw all the money at it and get 3D animation and all this kind of whiz bang things, which looks really sexy, but the content is very lazy. Yeah, so my work is really at the low tech end of the spectrum, and the accessibility for audiences as well as the artists is really important.
Thank you. I have a question for all three panelists, actually. I think it is the idea of erasure. And I think it's something that Rakini brought up about the whole ritual and the rasa and the senses. And Maria left us with the idea that of extending, to work with the absence and to extend the shared experience itself. And with the example of Lin Lu's now. So my question right now is the whole idea of senses, the embodied senses, and how can we, at this moment right now, look at extending this space, you know, particularly if we are supposed, particularly as we all know, well, the Singapore government has declared that the virus is here and we have to learn to live with it, you know. So how do we, with that in thought, you know, what are your thoughts on the idea of working with the absence of senses and how can we extend this into a shared experience itself? Maybe I can start with Rakini, because the Rasa created an idea.
Yes,
for me.
I mean, what I found most interesting was, to be honest, last year I was absolutely saturated with online performance, Zoom meetings, all of that. Normally I have all my tech needs, you know, working with a filmmaker or whatever, somebody else does it, but it was just like, I'm with Jill on that, you know, like a lot of my work also, which is one-on-one and which includes eye contact, all of that. But what came out of that was like a new relationship with one's body, which is what, you know, finding ways of, I mean, my task is not to extend my work into an online arena. I really am not interested in that. I'll do it because I have to, because that's what the situation is. And I'm interested in work that, like I said, I saw this show a few weeks ago, which was very interesting, and with works that were streamed live, that they were also interesting. So from being really anti, you know, everything online, Zoom and all of that, I've sort of go through stages, you know. So the exhibition was my way of dealing with the isolation and of creating spaces with just the concept of the presence of a body, which was not there. So that was an interesting concept. So even in my paintings or these structures that I created, there was a sense of a presence, but there was no body. So that was the feeling of it. And so that was sort of satisfying for me. But then unlike a lot of other people, I did have an audience eventually. The first time I did a work, I was alone in a studio. None of my collaborators could come. And I discovered something absolutely new, that I started painting on the floors, like, you know, like in India, we've got columns. So I started working, doing these elaborate chalk paintings, etc. So, I mean, I think what I was trying to say is that we have resources within our bodies, which are like archives. And, you know, there's an endless, you know, archive of possibilities that come from our, you know, from our embodied knowledge. And that's what interests me at the moment. You know, it's a challenge. It's not something I want to embrace, but it's a challenge. It's here. And like at this moment, you know, one of the things that broke my lonely lockdown last year was a conference, and I felt really rejuvenated for a few days. But like as Jill says, you know, sometimes the encounters even heightens your loneliness, because the minute that's over, you're in your solitary environment, you know. So it does have the ability to, I forgot what your question was even, I'm just rambling now. I'm sorry, it's getting close to my bedtime, so I'm just rambling here.
Okay, thank you. Jill, any thoughts to what Rakini said and the question that I had? Yeah.
Yes, I'm really reflecting on a lot of these things. What I found during lockdown was not the desire. It was I kind of accepted what was happening in quite I think quite graceful way, really. I live somewhere very beautiful. There was plenty of places for me to walk and to be alone in nature. And that became actually the most precious practice. I suddenly could feel and notice, for the first time in my life, I think, the seasons as they change. Every time I went to the woods, you know, I saw how the flowers had grown, how they died, how the next set of flowers came up. So this was an incredibly rich period of time. And I talk about it. We have a term in Welsh, which is the Milter Square, which means the square mile. And I think I just focused on my square mile. I couldn't go abroad. I couldn't meet all my friends, which has always been the balance for me of living in the country, that every few months I could get on a plane and go and be with people intensely. I had none of that. But I did come into commune with nature in such an important way. And my work before lockdown has been in exploring silence and quietness and quietude. And really, it's just allowed it to intensify. So I think instead of looking for the opportunities to go online, I went the other direction and just went a bit backwards and a bit more into my past and to when we didn't have theatre, I don't know, and found great beauty. And that's still my solace, really. And what I worry about is I actually feel quite strongly that it's going to be quite obscene to get on an airplane. It feels like an obscenity to me now, not just because of climate change, but in terms of listening to this year and what it's meant. And I don't think we haven't heard everything that this year was trying to teach us yet. It needs a lot of reflection. But I mean, that's not helping with the theme of the online work. I'm the Luddite here, so I wanted to go and look at a lot of this work that you've been telling me about. So thank you.
Maria, sense of ritual, and I mean, yeah, maybe we can elaborate a little bit more about Lou's work. You know, this whole shared experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking in terms of what Jill was saying. I live in a very ugly place, which is very urban, and it did feel suffocating after a certain point, the fact that I couldn't escape the urban kind of environment without using public transport, which I couldn't do. But what this resulted to for me, and sorry, that's not quite a response to your question, Elizabeth, sorry, it's a follow-up from Jill's, and it resulted to me taking up more gardening. And so I have the privilege of having a garden at least. And kind of, for me, it was the touching the soil and the connection with the plants that saved me during this time, as well as my children, which saved me both, and both drove me crazy at the same time. But I was wondering whether this isn't a different type of commitment. So, you know, then in normal times, we all travel around a lot, particularly artists and academics. We zoom around the planet and we hop on here and there and for short periods of time. And it's beautiful to develop those short encounters. But the year in Wood Green, in my case, kind of led me into a different kind of commitment with my local space, whatever that was. So both the garden, but also the ugliness of the local space. And as a result of that, we've come together, a group of neighbors, trying to fight for a bit of green land that the council wants to build on near our houses. So it's led to some kind of local activist action, if you like. So this isn't directly linked to performance, but for me, the commitment issue is a big question, and it is in online performance as well, particularly in platforms such as this. But I wonder whether it hasn't kind of led us to new types of commitment, different types of commitment to our locale and to not, you know, to animals and plants and different types of beings. So in terms of performance, sorry, I'm not at all answering your question. Because in terms of performance, I was still trying to follow on the chat, and the question of inequalities and digital poverty really does concern me. It's something that it has concerned me in my academic kind of role. Obviously, we have had students who we needed to address the fact that there was digital poverty, they couldn't access courses online and so on. But I wonder, again, has this situation made things better or worse or just different? So again, in the past, the fact that we all travel a lot is a massive privilege, and there are very many people, makers, performers, artists, and audiences who are not able to travel for financial reasons. They don't have the resource to live that lifestyle, are not able to connect with people from other parts of the world, are not able to have access to those cultural experiences. I also recently took part in a choreographic lab that isn't the one that was talked about here by Rakini, which was around technology and different types of ability and disability. I don't like the term, but so we talked a lot about access, and some people did say how wonderful it was for them that all the performances went online and they didn't have to negotiate all the difficulties of getting on the underground and getting into theatre spaces which are really not designed for people, wheelchair users, for example. So sorry, I'm rambling as well. I don't have a kind of clear thread, but I'm really interested in the question of inequalities and digital poverty and the shift this has caused to access, to issues of access. I'll shut up.
No, I mean, the issues of disparity is quite prevalent. I mean, I think in Philippines, I keep sharing this, you know, what the government has done to reach out to the village was to use radio waves and television to teach the children in the village. I think one of the story that went out was a student in Malaysia, you know, who just had an old mobile phone online, and she climbed up just to sit in exams. And I think that's a serious, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, that's a serious question, but I'm going to keep quiet right now. And Helen, there's someone else.
Yeah, here's Mariana. And there's a question from Carenza asking if the funding bodies, institutions funding live performances and online performances, if they are seeing online performances as relevant as live performances, or does it slip into new technologies, into categories of new technology? Should online performance be treated equally with live performances? Has it created opportunities for new audiences in your experience? Just questions from Karenza. I guess to everyone. And
can I speak? I don't have any idea about funding or anything of that, but I think it has become, especially here in Australia, it's become a necessity to have the option. So it's, I don't think it's being treated as a separate. So basically it's almost goes without saying that if you have an upcoming event, you know, you have to consider it. Even if it's a gallery, if it's a visual exhibition, you have to consider whether that's going to be an option or not. So that's what's happening. Yeah, I have nothing else to say about that. I was sort of more or less wanting to still talk about the privilege factor, because that whole aspect of the disparity of resources all over the world was just really struck me during the last conference, because people couldn't even attend the conference from places in various in India and the Philippines because they just didn't have that access. So yes, in some countries where it's where we enjoy that privilege, yes, you know, it's being taken as a given that if it isn't a live performance, there will be that option to you know, buy a ticket online or whatever.
Helen, or Maria, sorry, and then we go on to Helen.
Yes, I would want to respond to the question about funding. And the Dream Online piece, which I briefly referred to, had a lot of funding, very significant. I can't remember how many millions of pounds this was. It wasn't intended to be online. It was intended to be an immersive VR experience, but it became online due to the COVID restrictions. But I do think that there is the pandemic, amongst all the damage and pain that it has caused, it also offers opportunities to artists working with those technologies and who have been doing so for a very long time to perhaps access resources and funding kind of sources that weren't available to them previously, because this was considered to be a peripheral kind of niche type of practice, and suddenly it isn't. It is mainstream. And I actually think it's really important to do that and to engage with those works, because there is a little bit of erasure of history that is happening at the same time when the big organizations and big institutions jump on the bandwagon of online performance without acknowledging you know, the pioneers and the histories that have been written by people such as Helen and others here and elsewhere. So I do hope that this will give opportunities for more funding for this type of work. And it will also give opportunities for different types of audience to access work that weren't necessarily, you know, that are not necessarily the natural theatre goers, that are people who wouldn't normally go to theatres or to institutions, kind of cultural institutions and so on.
So I have to say something to this. Maria has said a lot of what I would have said, but as someone who has been trying to access funding in this area for more than 20 years, it's extremely difficult, and it still is. Until last year, it was difficult because nobody knew where to put us. So there have been different situations. Like in Australia, for example, they had a very good scheme for quite a long time for digital arts. It was much better than in New Zealand. In New Zealand, they would put us sometimes in theatre or sometimes in visual arts, or they kept coming up with different ways to categorize things, and quite often we just fell in between what they were wanting. And one of the biggest problems that still exists with accessing funding is the need for it to have a regional context. So my work is, the majority of it is really global. Like I apply in New Zealand because that's where I'm from, or I apply in Germany because that's where I'm living. But in fact, the work is happening all over the world. And I've found very, very, very few funds that really allow for that. Most of them, like if I apply for money in Germany, they say you have to have the premiere and 5 performances in Germany. And I say, well, it's online, so does that count? You know? And so there's still this mentality, and it's understandable because they get funding from tax or from other sources that are regional based. So, and you can't kind of argue against most of it. And yes, now there is suddenly a whole lot more money for this kind of work, but there's even more people that are asking for it. The competition is so much more. You know, I've done in the last 6 months more than 10 funding applications for Upstage, and they've all been rejected. And then you get, of course, the big names that come in, like Maria was saying, that gobble up a lot of this money because they are the National Theatre or whatever, a famous person, and they're going to do this amazing, radical, new, never done before online performance. And so the funders will think, oh, wow, this will be great, and throw the money at them. And just to finish something that Suzanne and Annie and I did at the end of last year, we were so frustrated by all of these big theatre companies saying they were making the first ever online this, that, and the next thing. So we put together a little 5-minute video, and maybe Suzanne, I don't know if you've got the link at your fingertips, you could put it in the chat, where we just really quickly asked people that we could easily ask, when was your first online performance? And then we put together a kind of, like they do the top of the pops, you know, the hits of the years going back, and made this going back to 91. We could have gone back further or been more in depth, but we just wanted to do something really, oh, sorry, I'm going too fast. It's because I'm passionate. Sorry, Eugenia. Yeah, I stop.
Okay, Jill, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just very briefly, because I just wanted to say to Helen, it was ever thus, Helen. It was ever thus, that this is not a surprise that this is happening.
Yeah.
And I think but I was really glad when you brought up the thing that you and Suzanne did, because I think those are the actions that are going to get noticed when you start putting it back through history and creating that kind of activist statements. So the more of that, the better. But you know, you won't get the funding. The National Theatre will get the funding, and that is just how it is. So what do we do? You know, it's the same with trying to get money for women's stuff. You know, forget it. You know, Women's Experimental International, forget it. Nobody wants it. So what do you do? What's the step? The sideways step, as we say, in order to continue working and to create communities and keep working, because we're not going to get the money, you know.
Well, I just keep doing it anyway, you know.
I know you do.
Yeah, but I'm fortunate that I can do that. I know that not everybody is in such a position as I am that they can do that. Yeah.
I want to go back to what Jill was talking, you know, the whole idea of transcending the space, the frame, because this will bring us to our second day panel, which is Shift in Practice, the idea of, you know, breaking this frame. And the very poignant example was Parvati's performance. You know, it was very evocative. in the sense that, you know, I was really overwhelmed by that. And and to be honest, I'm one of those people, when I watch online pieces, I just get bored. You know, I fidget, I look at my phone, I look at something else, and, you know, there's a lot of distraction. But I think there's something to look at, you know, like this frame. And I think Maria shared about that in talking about this shared experience. And maybe we can, you know, have this, you know, I want to open this up to the floor and to the panel, you know, about transcending this space, you know. We know that a lot of the technology and the platform we use, these are means of communication and to connect, you know. So how the rigid of this, you know, this frame is something that, you know, yeah, you know, to think about, to reflect. Yeah, Rakini, yes.
I'm going to say, I'm looking forward to seeing Jill's performance of Daughter, because that's, you know, that having just seen Parvati do, you know, what you've just said about transcending, I'm interested to see how this, you know, the intimacy of how we can share. And I mean, all we can do is really keep experimenting with this, whether we like it or not, because, you know, I have a work as well, which has a one-on-one, which I haven't tried, obviously, online. But like you, Jill, I was also surprised with the feeling. I was just thinking that something like Parvati's singing could never come, you know, I'd never be able to appreciate it, because obviously I've seen her in the flesh, and you know, I thought, you know, how can it be? But, you know, she did actually prove it. However, not everybody does. And, you know, like you said, we have so many distractions and things, but like also, which I said, it's an area and it's a part of research that I look at as a challenge. And so I'm looking forward to just looking at what all the other, experiments that people can do, including myself, and learn from it. And also to learn a different way of looking. You know, we're also really spoiled with different options, and, you know, and I think, you know, we have to be continually educating ourselves in ways of looking at work, because we just sink into, you know, apathy or whatever, you know, that happens with whatever that's going on. But anyway, just wanted to say that about Daughter.
Can I just say something? I would this going back to this frame thing, because it's a new, you know, I've been thinking about it, but I've got no answers, and I'd be really interested to know, because there's a lot of really interesting people in the audience or in the participants here today, just really what other people are thinking about frame, if anybody's got any thoughts on it, really, and how we can transcend this square rectangle that I fed up of looking at. Yeah, so I don't know if maybe the moderators can find, maybe nobody's got any thoughts about it.
Can I come in while we're collecting thoughts?
Yes.
So for me, the types of work that have achieved that over the years are works such as Wirefire. And that's because of the commitment that you were talking about, Jill, before. So that work transcended the frame through repetition, through community, through the fact that we were going back every week in that relationship, in that encounter, revisiting that encounter. Other works that have kind of been able to transcend that frame for me are works such as, for example, Blast Theory's work. I don't know if you're familiar with a British group called Blast Theory, who've been doing media art performance for many years, use gaming platforms and so on. And a lot of their work, more recent work, for example, an old work actually, it takes place on different platforms. So that kind of multi-platform development where the character might use Facebook and Twitter and email you and text you and call you and send you a letter in the post. And kind of you can see that character develop through the different platforms before coming to your screen, or as well as coming to your screen. And so you still don't have the physical encounter, but at least it transcends the limitations of the screen by traveling in different types of encounters. And so there's a richness there in the connection. And what I find interesting in some of Plus Theory's work is that it asks you to go out, and a lot of promenade performances do that. A lot of what's it called, gaming performances, where you have to look for clues in physical space, for example, and so you have to use your body to engage with the work. And that, I think, is the key, which is very similar to Lynn Loon's piece, which was a very simple invitation to just attend, take part in the performance from your bath. But if you do that, you already are in a different situation. And so the screen, you already have a different relationship with the screen. So I don't know if that helps, but yeah, that's my response.
There's been a few comments in the chat. Julie Robson said that she and Dawn will talk about this in their talk tomorrow, and Bianca is also on the panel tomorrow, I think, and we'll be talking about this methodology of becoming instead of being, and playful affinity with the audience. So these are things that you can join tomorrow's panel, which is it at the same time as today's? No, it's 1 hour later. Yeah. And the Ladyfinger talk is actually, for us in Europe, it's the middle of our night tonight. And then Karenza has said, but the camera can move. You can change the frame with your hands. The Zoom frame has to be your friend. Clara says, I think it is time for new interfaces. Most of them not new, but that can become more accessible, to be put to work not only by artists, but in our everyday life. I'm not sure if she's given any examples of what those are. Christina says, from my personal experience, the use of the chat box as the main stage, where performers and audiences co-write the performance in real time, allowing them to interact, have a say, and why not take over, coexisting in this shared space. So this is her way of breaking the frame. And Suzanne is... Oh, did I miss?
Ramsden, yeah.
What did her... frame is definitely a challenge. I, with others, have been trying by using the edges and off-screen to see what is possible, trying to explode, break through, trick the frame. And there are some more. Suzanne agreeing it's nice to have the bodily experience, and that Ladyfinger this is Julian Dawn, is at 10 a.m. in Australia, but this is 1 a.m. or 1:30 in the morning for you, Jill. And Clara's given a link to Census Places, which is an online project. I think is that in the one in Second Life, Clara, which is a virtual world. Christina is talking about waitingforgodot.com, which was a very early online performance by Desktop Theatre, who were the people that I first got involved with online. And they did Waiting for Godot in a chat room where the audience and the performers were literally in the same space. So like street theatre. And yeah, no frames or no boxes, but still the frame of the computer screen, obviously. But this one was where the audience could participate in the performance. And in this one, Godot arrived. So instead of waiting for Godot, the audience took over, and an audience member changed their name to Godot and joined in the performance. And Maria is mentioning wearables. So this is like technology that you can wear that can be used like sensors or various different devices that are part of your costume. Clara says a webcam that captures your movement while you dance and moves an avatar. Yep, so motion sensors. Carenza wishes cameras were on. She wouldn't type so much. She'd raise her hands and say, yeah. So Suzanne is talking about how old movies explored also how to reach out from the frame, which I think is similar to what Hilary said about, you know, there is a frame here, but things can happen just outside of it or reach into it or out of it. Leticia watched plays that called you live to make a move or say a word with an open mic. And Suzanne thinks Jill won't like the technical aspects of censors. Yeah, so there are a lot of ideas there.
Yeah, and actually tomorrow's we have a surprise for the way we are doing the format of the panel. So I'm looking forward because they want to also change this frame at tomorrow's you know, I mean what's interesting for me you know is the reflection that I'm getting about this, the whole notion of online performances and liveness and, you know, live and real time, and I guess the one of, you know, how even if you do try the remote and everything else, the visual entity is still within the frame. You know, we're still driven by this you know, by how we look and how we see. And I wonder, I mean, my I guess one last question, because, you know, we have about 10 minutes left. You know, the idea of and I think Rakini brought it up, that pandemic is another privilege, you know, space. And I thought that was a interesting provocation. You know, maybe Rakini, would you like, yeah.
Well, I wrote a whole paper on it, so, but I won't bore. I won't bore everyone with that. But after the last pandemic COVID dance conference I gave, that was the thing that struck me the most, was the fact that, you know, everything was, you know, I was feeling really sorry for myself being isolated, but, you know, suddenly being zoomed into other people's houses, and where they just didn't even have internet, where, as I said, you know, they had so many other problems having. So privilege was a huge thing. I was talking to my friend Guillermo Gomez Peña in Mexico, and he was saying it was terrible there. Nobody had any, was taking any precautions. Again, he said, it's a privilege. He said, we just, isolating is a privilege. And it became this huge debate with all these, you know, Asian countries and Australia. We were all discussing, and we started to discuss what the notion of space was. You know, it's from taking it from metaphors of space to actual physical space to then, you know, the virtual space. And the same thing, accessibility became all about privilege. You know, what we take for granted in, say, you know, in privileged countries, or the resources that we have, is, you know, it's obviously different everywhere. So it just affects that. And that, to me, and it's also the priorities that different people give to each. So that has a real impact on, you know, if you are struggling to survive in a physical sense with your mental health, with just accessing life's necessities, you know, art seems to be, I felt rather, you know, I felt guilty and even shallow just thinking about my art. You know, it's like, you know, I've got friends, you know, in India who were suffering, and relatives in Asia and things. And you know, so there's all of that that really affected me a lot with this, so that's where the idea of this, the ruptures and the erasures, you know, all of these, you know, words, because you know, here I think we're sort of almost seamlessly being able to have performances and then also offer the streaming option and all of that. And but in many cases, without travel and without actual physical presence, people just can't, just cannot, you know, I mean, even it's not an option. I mean, I've struggled my whole life as an artist, but, you know, this added challenge, because a lot of the work that a lot of independent artists do depends on traveling, whether it's, you know, even just regionally or, you know, nationally or whatever. So it has become a huge issue, you know, sustaining your practice with all of this.
Thank you. The other two panels, would you like to add anything on to what Rakini has said?
Just very briefly, I'm just responding to this sustaining one's practice and thinking about one's practice in these privileged times. And I think I come back to saying what I said before, which is we haven't listened for long enough to this last year. And maybe an awful lot of things need to be utterly redefined. And we haven't had time yet. We haven't swallowed it yet. But I think we need to be open to really rethinking what practice is and what connection is and what our work needs to be in, as we say, BC, before Corona, and AC after Corona. That's all I wanted to add.
Maria?
Yes, I'm happy for Jill to be the last word.
All right. Well, we have 4 minutes left of the panel. I think I would like to just say thank you. Thank you very much to Jill, Rakini, and Maria. You've opened up a lot of points for us to reflect. And as Jill said, we need some time to really listen and to practice. And you know, to rethink, I think what practice is also quite crucial, because I'm also rethinking my role as a performance maker. You know, as you can see, I'm happy to just organize and not partake in this online space, you know, in another manner, because I'm afraid, yeah. So, you know, this space is an interesting space to be in. With that, with that, I think I want to say thank you to everybody. Yes, we see you. We have block. Sorry, I have to look at my schedule. Sorry, we have block 2 coming up of Artist Talk. We have a performance by Deborah Hunt. We have Carolina doing Woman to Woman, and a work in progress by Mobilize and Demobilize. So please join us later in the evening. It's at 6 p.m. UK time and 7 p.m. Europe time, and I will be in bed. But I will see you all tomorrow for our second day of our panel. So thank you very much, everybody. And yes, donations are welcome. I want to say, you know, the whole team, we are very, very grateful and felt very encouraged, and are very encouraged. Actually, we still are very encouraged with the support that we have received. That we can, and now we can use the donations to actually, you know, go, and the donations can now go to the artist itself. So thank you very much, good night, and or good evening or good morning, wherever you are. And yes, if you come to Hong Kong, if you do come to Hong Kong, Dim Sum, one Dim Sum is on me. Yeah, thank you. Helen, do you need to say anything? Sorry.
Well, I am the host also of the whole block, so I guess I can just also say thanks very much to everyone. And yeah, the panel was great, really good to hear everybody's different perspectives. And I I hope we managed, that Marianne and I managed to get everyone's questions from the chat. It was a bit fast for a while there.
If you want to continue, you can go to the observatory,
Observer story. Yeah.
Correct.
Yes, if people are desperate to keep talking, the Observer story is open. Maybe Christina, if you're still there, could you put the link into it and then people can easily go there. Otherwise, we're back here in 3 hours for block 2. And we hope that some of you will be back wanting more. And we are recording, so the chat and the talks and everything have been recorded.
Thank you to Eugenia for translating. Yeah.
Very important. I'm sorry that we were so fast.
Yeah.
There's the link to the Observer story for anybody that wants to go and check it out. It's pretty fun.